we've got two speakers in terms of the first part of this conference, and it's on the subject of examining the role of women across local government. Understanding why women are underrepresented in senior positions, and that, you know, those statistics are surprising, aren't they, in terms of how underrepresented women are today. And this theme will also talk about tackling the cultural practices and tackling the obstacles to leadership as well. So it's a really important theme. So we've got two speakers, and the first to speak, and this is a real honour. The first to speak is Dame Margaret Hodge. Now, Dame Margaret Hodge has been a Member of Parliament since 1994. She's held a number of government positions in the last Labour government, and within that, a whole range of portfolios. She's the first woman elected chair of the Public Accounts Committee, and she's an active and has been an active community campaigner for 2 decades. So it's a real honour to introduce Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thanks so much. Am I all right? Can you hear me? It's all clear, is it? Yeah, good. Thanks so much. And I'm sorry I didn't hear absolutely everything you said, because I obviously switched in a little late, but that sounded like a very powerful introduction. So thank you for this. This is, I think, the 3rd year I've spoken at these events, and I'm really, really pleased that the LGA are putting them on. Let me start by really, and I'm sorry if I repeat a little bit what the stuff that Susan said, but Britain does pride itself on lots of things that we do, and there are an increasing number of things where I think the rhetoric doesn't match up to the reality, and women's representation is one of those areas. If you look at the global list of where we stand in women's representation in relation to other countries, we're 49th on that list, and top is Rwanda, and they're followed by Bolivia, Cuba, and the Seychelles. So these countries that we often think we've got a lot to teach are actually got something to teach us in terms of women's representation. And when I came to Parliament, I was shocked to learn that I am only the 165th woman ever to sit as a woman member of Parliament. That's pretty horrific too. You know, as we come into the 21st, as we are in the middle of the 21st century, the first woman to take her seat in the House of Commons was, of course, Nancy Astor, and she took her seat just over 100 years ago in 1919. And we're still at the position today where 2/3 of the people in Parliament are men. Though I have to say, if you look at Labour representation, and I want to come back to that when I talk about actions we can take, Labour representation, we now have 53% of Labour MPs are women. So there is something from what we've done that I think all political parties can look at, think about, and see what they can take away from and learn. When I first arrived at the House of Commons as the 165th woman MP, there were more women there were more men named John, whose first name was John, who were MPs, than there were women. And one of my very early recollections, and I'm sorry we can't do this in a live audience, is that when you had difficulty in finding the women's loos in the House of Commons in those days, there weren't many of them. And the only ironing board in the whole of the Palace of Westminster was in the woman's lavatory, in the women's room. Local government is equally abysmal, and I'm sure that you've had the statistics, but we're only 1/3 of councillors are women. Look at the metro mayors, they are all men. There's that horrific picture when they were first all elected of a whole bunch of men, and only 3 of the directly elected mayors are women. Only 1 in 5 leaders in local government are women. And if women do hold cabinet positions, they will tend to be in health and social care. And I think only 1% of the people who hold the finance portfolios in cabinet are women. That is all shocking. And when I chaired a couple of years back, the Fawcett Society undertook a commission looking at women's representation in local government. When I shared that, I think one of the most shocking facts I found was the discrimination against women, particularly at cabinet level, if they became pregnant or had babies. People basically were sacked from their portfolios, sacked from their from the cabinet if they were pregnant and had babies. And some of that was happening in Labour seats, in Labour controlled councils, where there has been a much greater attempt to get the culture change we need. So where do we go from here? One of my first things I would say to you, and from my experience, is life is a marathon, not a sprint. So we don't feel you've got a lot of years in front of you. There's a long time in which you can choose to come in and out of representative positions, whether it's on a council, whether it's in your political party, whether it's in parliament, or whether it's on one of the regionally elected bodies. So you don't have to do it all today. You don't have to do it all by the time you're 30, you're 35. Life is a marathon, and there is time for us all to take part. And so that's my first thing to say. And the second thing is there'll always be tensions in women's lives. We'll always face the tension between our caring responsibilities, whether it's for children or for elder care, and our desire to take part in local authorities, local government, or elsewhere. And I think actually life is worse now for local councillors than it was when I was a councillor in the 70s and the 80s, because now most women also work. So you're trying to hold down 3 jobs: a job in the home with the caring that involves, a job of work that brings the money into the house, and then the job of being the councillor. And those tensions, I think we need to think about a little more than we have done, because it's more complex and it's more difficult than when I was when I was on a council. And I'll just share with you the impact of those tensions on one incident that I always tell about my own life. I'd just been elected as a member of parliament. This was 1994. The Labour Party had just elected Tony Blair as our political leader. And one of the ways in which you could demonstrate that you were working really hard in the House of Commons was to sit behind your leader during Prime Minister's questions. But to do that, you had to go into the chamber about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour early to bag a seat. So I did that. It was about 94, just literally after he'd been elected as our leader. Did that, sat down, felt really pleased myself. Prime Minister's questions started, and I thought, oh, all the good burghers of Barking and Dagenham will see that I am here representing them in the House of Commons. And in those days, we didn't have mobile phones, but we had pagers. And suddenly my pager goes off with a message from my 15-year-old daughter, who was at home studying for her GCSEs, saying, "Mum, crisis, ring home." So I thought, oh my God, what has she done? Is the house on fire? Is she going to tell me she's pregnant? And I leave the seat behind Tony Blair, go out, pick up the phone and say, "What's the matter, Anna? What is it?" And she said, "Oh, nothing, Mum. I just wanted to see whether you had your pager on silent." But I lost my place behind Tony Blair, but I put my responsibilities to my children, my worries about the children first. So that's life is a marathon, and there are always tensions. We shouldn't try to fight it. We should try and manage it. The other thing I've learned from my years in public life is you can never take your foot off the accelerator. When I was a councillor in 1978, I was the first person ever to ask for maternity leave. In those days, we didn't have, we had chairs of committees. It was a much more democratic, in my view, way of running councils. And I was the chair of the housing committee. I was pregnant with my third child. I asked for maternity leave. I think the leader was completely shocked, gave it to me because it was difficult to resist. But when I came back after the maternity leave, I promptly lost my job as chair of housing. And the other thing I remember in the 80s, when I became leader of the council, it took me 3 years to convince my male colleagues that we should have a rule which meant that you couldn't start an evening meeting before 7:30 unless all members of the committee agreed. And that was really to help people who were putting children and young babies to bed. But it took me 3 years because the men all wanted the meetings earlier so they could spend more time in the pub afterwards. But the way I've learned that you can't take your foot off the accelerator was partly from the work I did on the commission for the Fawcett Society, but partly also from my own family. So my children are all now having children. And in my own immediate family, one of my daughters worked for a inner London borough, and they tried to make her redundant when she was on maternity leave. Shocking. Another of my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, worked for, so that's the public sector. She worked for a private law firm, and they literally gave her an offer, which she couldn't refuse. They gave her an offer on the day before she had her first baby. And the third example I've got is my niece, who had to have IVF treatment and worked for a voluntary organization in London. And they sacked her because she was taking too much time off to have her IVF treatment. So things that I thought that my generation had sorted, like maternity rights, are still challenged today. And we've seen that in councils who get rid of people on cabinets when the women have babies. And so you can never take your foot off the accelerator. And that's another third thing. And what else works? Well, I have to say, from my experience in the Labour Party, positive action has to come about. And I would urge everybody in all political parties to take that. Without positive action today in Labour, we wouldn't have the hundreds, thousands of really, really talented women representing us in local authorities and in Parliament. I think the younger women in Parliament today, and just think of some of the people on the Labour benches who are emerging now, like Rachel Reeves and Bridget Phillipson and Annalisa Dodds. There's a ton, and Liz Kendall, there's tons of them that are really, really blossoming, talented, good, clever, good representatives, and that wouldn't have happened without positive actions. So we all have to think about that, and all political parties need to act. It's not something we can do without the support of all political parties. I think networking is hugely important, why today's occasion matters a lot. I've always been in women's networks all my working life, and it's always paid off. And in the House of Commons, we network, the women network across political divides, and it pays off. I mean, we got baby leave in the House of Commons through on the back of cross-party working, and we've got a lot of the policies on harassment, sexual harassment and bullying through cross-party working. Mentoring matters a lot. I do a lot of that for young women, and I love it. And I'm sure there are a lot of women who've managed to break through glass ceilings and who would be happy to mentor. And I think celebrating role models really matters too. And there are plenty, there's a growing number of utterly stunning women in all areas of responsibility who are there. And why does it matter? Why does women's representation matter? Which will be my final points. You do bring a different perspective as a woman. And I think back to my years as a councillor, we introduced in the 80s a maternity rights package for our workforce, which was lambasted by the press. We said that you didn't have to have years working for Islington Council before you were entitled to maternity leave. And of course, people didn't come and work for Islington Council just to have babies, which is what everybody feared about. We were lambasted, but I think that has now become much more the norm across the place. And I remember we opened one of the very first workplace nurseries in local authorities again in the 80s. And again, we were lambasted for wasting ratepayers' money, council taxpayers' money. But of course, today that is an accepted norm. So I think we make a I feel we made a difference on those sort of things when I was a councillor. And in government, when I was part of the Blair-Brown government, I know we made a difference. I know that the childcare Sure Start programme would not have evolved as well and as rapidly as it did, but for the women who were involved in it. And it's one of my proudest achievements as children's minister to be part of that group of women who led those changes. I know, for example, that persuading Gordon Brown, when he introduced child tax credits, to give it to the purse, not the wallet, was something that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't have women. And I really know that the right to request flexible working, which I think has been one of the most important and life-changing policies that have been implemented by government, certainly in my life as a public servant, would never, ever have happened if there hadn't been a group of women in Parliament, MPs, working together with the women at Number 10 to persuade a resistant Tony Blair and a resistant Gordon Brown, who thought the business sector would hate it, that they should go ahead with it. And again, that has proved to be an incredibly successful policy, not just for making it easier for women to manage their lives, but actually helping businesses keep the talents and the experience and the expertise that women bring to the job. And every job I did in government, I was able to achieve something for women, whether it was getting women on boards when I was culture minister, or whether it was setting up a networking group, which still exists today, for women in business when I worked in the business department. So it's important that we keep fighting. Our cause is just and right. We come into politics, or you come into local government, you come into public service because you want to change the world and make it a better place. And never forget that, because that is really, really important. And some of the things of which I'm most proud in my life as a public servant are the things that I achieved as a councillor. So stay strong. Good luck to all of you. And I know at the end of today, we will win this fight on women's representation. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Dame Margaret Hodge. That was fantastic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the second speaker on this theme. And then what we'll do is we'll have some Q&As after the second speaker has spoken. So in terms of, if I can give an introduction for the councillor Marianne Overton, MBE. So it's fantastic to welcome you here, Marianne. So you discovered people power in a successful campaign for a bypass, and you've had a real passion and leadership in organising and running diversity exhibitions, which looked like they led you to being the governor of the University of Lincoln. So you're also, Marianne's also a director of the Primary Care Trust. And she served in many roles in terms of whether in control, in no overall control. And now Marianne leads the independent group of councillors in the Local Government Association and the Independent Network. So it's my real pleasure to welcome Marianne to speak. So thank you, Marianne.
Very good morning to everybody. It's a delight to be able to talk to you, and I'll be listening as well to hear your comments. And thank you very much indeed to Margaret Hodge. I thought that was absolutely brilliant, but then she's always brilliant. So thank you very much indeed. It's great to see so many of you online interested in improving our world. And isn't it great that we actually have a vaccine approved now, and the first in the world from a team of scientists led by two women, Sarah Gilbert and Catherine Green. Fantastic. So I'm Councillor Marianne Overton, Vice Chairman of the Local Government Association and leader of the Independent Group. Close on 3,000 elected councillors now across England and Wales, and Vice Chairman of the Women's Local Government Society, active member of the Fawcett Society. And I also lead the Independent Network, which is a political group to support independent councillors and candidates right across the country. So we're very keen to get more people to come forward to stand, and we try to help level the playing field to make sure they come in. And that's particularly trying to get more diversity of thinking as well as more diversity of women. So it's a great pleasure to be here as part of an all-female panel today as well. And at each step that I've gone through parish council elections, district, county, regional and national, the ever narrower gate rubbed off the diversity of people that pass through, so that by the time you get to those higher levels, I did find myself very often as the only woman on the panel and on the board. And I think that's quite it takes quite some courage not to notice. And I think that's one of the first pieces of advice that I was given was, what about the glass ceiling? What glass ceiling? Just take no notice and do your job really well and succeed. And I think that's quite an interesting approach, not to be put off by things, but to just concentrate on what you want to achieve and to do it. And I think that's been really helpful piece of advice that I got. So I found that was the case until I got to the European local government, where they require at least half of their voting delegates from each country to be women. Wow, what a difference that makes. And this is the same policy as just been mentioned about the positive approach that taking to women, actually making sure they have the opportunity and succeeding extremely well and running an excellent organization, which is a real joy to be part of. Women in local governments is something I'm really passionate about, and particularly ensuring that we gain equal opportunity to democracy, to power, and to money. We're shaped by our experiences, and looking back as a child in Southern Africa, where I was brought up, I saw inequality square in the face. And I have been fighting injustice ever since. It's not very long ago that schools sent all the girls off to do cooking, while the boys went to do the real sciences. And I was lucky as a child, in my school was more sensible. And my first career led to some great leadership opportunities, running biodiversity expeditions with scientists and with young people in Central Africa, working alongside local game wardens. What a great opportunity. I'd never have had that if I had not had the scientific basis in my career. That's so important. In England, as a single parent family living in my aunt's spare room in Westminster, my mother struggled to make ends meet. And one day she came home from work saying that she was now going to be paid the same as the men who worked alongside her. That was a third increase in salary. And I didn't have to go without anymore. We've seen huge improvements in legislation, and thanks to Margaret Hodge's campaign too. I really appreciate that. Thank you for that work. For those who like numbers, there are a few takeaways. 78% in local government are women, only 17% of the bosses, has been mentioned. Only a third of councillors are women. It's hardly risen in decades. Given the recent, we had centenary, where the first women were being able to vote in national elections 100 years since, you'd think we would be better represented. It won't have escaped your notice that nationally we have a few women in power. Have you noticed that they often get the jobs when it's toughest? So we had Maggie Thatcher with the unions, and we had Theresa May with Brexit. 3 of the 5 big hitters have now been replaced by men. Yet at the same time, we have significant gender gap right across the majority of industries, promotion, within councillor roles, and like others, remain stubbornly male dominated if we let them. It seems we don't so much have a glass ceiling as a sticky floor. I do think local government has led the way in many aspects. Women were able to vote in the local elections early, nearly 50 years ago, when that was allowed in Westminster. They stood in local elections in 1907, and before that worked as poor law guardians and used positions to fight for better conditions for communities. Yet it took a world war for men to accept that women were not, after all, too hysterical or too prone to emotion and subject to generous impulses that made them unfit for elected office. How bizarre is that? It is therefore disappointing and endemic of a broken system that the proportion of women councillors has remained static for some time and progress has been glacial. This is something we need to change. So, tackling some of the barriers, I like to mention suffragettes and indeed the personal cost of wars to protect our right to vote. When I knock on a door and find a woman who says, I don't vote, it's something really missing. There's something lacking in the communication and in the concept of what local government is about, that we are speaking on their behalf, and that's why we need their connections, and that's why we need them to be thinking, listening, and telling us what they need. So what are the ways that we can encourage more women to serve as local councillors to come forward? I think we're competent female councillors. Are they still passed over for promotion? And I think they are. I did a little survey in my council about the amount of money that went to women as went to male councillors, and we were definitely disadvantaged. So I've been working on that. Councillors need access to useful meeting times, childcare, parental leave, and even the lack of pension contributions can be barriers for women if they're choosing to support their local communities as councillors. Those councils that operate as old boys clubs must look outwards and nurture new talent. Otherwise, they risk becoming obsolete to at least half of their electorate. There is no place for misogyny in our councils. The adversarial nature of our politics in central government can also spill over into the community as disrespect and even intimidation of our councillors. In my area, one of our long-standing political colleagues recently gave up her seat because of the pressure of intimidation she faced from political competitors in the community. Another colleague of mine has just won her case for £70,000 because of harassment from people in the community tackling. So I'm pleased that she's won, and I hope that will be the first of many and a lesson to many. I think councils need to be very much more protective towards councillors as well as to staff in those circumstances. The Local Government Association, I have to say, is joyously cross-party, leading and joyously not misogynistic, leading to a sensible approach where we are able to sit round the table and look for the best solutions for our residents. Doesn't that feel good? The Committee on Standards in Public Life recently published their report into intimidation. And as a result of one of its recommendations, the government has now pledged that councillors will no longer, and in fact do no longer, have to publish their private address on public ballot papers. Looking at a personal journey, I've been elected onto district and county council 13 times over a quarter of a century, and now represent some 13,000 people. So, and that's in my own ward, in my own area. So thinking a few things of what I learned and also a few from others. Another one is about being resilient. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody gets knockbacks. Don't dwell on them. You know, don't beat yourself up. And one of the phrases is never look back, because that's not the way you're going. I think it's about being true to yourself, recognizing that your gender is not a weakness, but it's a significant strength. As a councillor, for all of us, we need to be accessible, keep your integrity, and be close to the people you serve. And then one from another colleague, from Maxine, who just won the case. She said her quote that she was using was from Gabby Douglas, is don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. Keep fighting for your dreams. So what help is there? The Local Government Association, I have to say, is really brilliant at offering support for people wanting to be councillors and being councillors. So there's plenty of opportunities to take, and we do get the best skills and talent into local government. It's just too important to be left to chance. We need diversity to be representative and diversity of thought if we are to get the best decisions. So let's identify who is at the heart of our communities and ask them to stand. The Ask Her to Stand campaign, which is also national for MPs as well, challenges us all to identify women and put them forward, encourage them, not just once, maybe 6 or 7 times. Ask them if you think they'd be good. The LGA's Be a Councillor campaign works to increase the pool of talent from which the councillors are elected, and particularly supported of underrepresented groups. And so I was very pleased to hear about yesterday's meeting as well. Really good to encourage BAME people into it specifically. So there are networks of female councillors who can help and advise people thinking about standing for election. And the mentoring, I think, is really important. That's been mentioned by Margaret Hodge. Wonderful, wonderful thing to do. In closing, it's important to take the opportunities, like the recent centenary of suffrage, to reflect on pioneers and champions of the past, but to look at those that are there now and give them support too. The statistics show the pace remains too slow. It is incumbent on each of us to continue the struggle to ensure that our elected representatives are truly representative of the communities we serve. And that, my friends, is up to you and me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. That's really fantastic, and thank you very much, Margaret. I just want to say what fantastic speakers you've been. I mean, clearly in your careers, you've made real change, real sustained change, and spearheaded action and absolutely breaking that glass ceiling. And I mean, I've got a couple of questions myself that I just wanted to put to you. I can't see any questions at the moment, so I think we've got about 10 minutes or so left. So if I can maybe put a question to Margaret. I know that, Margaret, that you mentioned the importance of never taking your foot off the accelerator. What would you say to women today about the type of things that they can do to ensure that we never take that foot off our accelerator? Sorry, I think you're on mute, Margaret. Sorry.
Sorry, I put myself on mute. I was saying that's a difficult question, but can I start by saying how brilliantly Marianne spoke as well? That was really, really great, Marianne, to hear that. I mean, I think you've just got to be conscious. I genuinely thought that my generation had solved the issue about maternity leave and maternity rights. I just thought that was an achievement that you could put down to my generation, that we'd got the legislation in. But getting legislation in does not mean a culture change. That's what you learn. Legislation gives you the sort of basis on which to build a culture change. So how do you not take the foot off the accelerator? By just being absolutely conscious of these things, by, again, working with others, by calling it out. Women are very reluctant to call bad practice out. We've got to do that, and it can be. I was shocked to hear that Marianne had 2 colleagues who'd one given up on harassment, the other one who's won a case. That is shocking. But you have, and all power to the 2 women who were brave. Well, who were brave enough to call it. You've got to call it out, and you've just got to keep. That's what I probably mean. Calling it out, working with other women, and never forgetting the things you've achieved before you move on to the next stage. There'll always be more that we want to do, but don't think that the steps we've taken, the ladder we've climbed, that you couldn't fall down it again. So I suppose those are the main things I did. I mean, with one of my daughters, I was so angry with the local authority. I said, I'll fund the legal action. So, in practical ways you can help like that, because she couldn't afford to, because, got little kids and things. So we started down that route. But calling it out, I think, is really, really important. Shaming those who do it. I was shocked, Susan, if I can say so, I was shocked to hear when we did that commission, the Fawcett Society, that women are getting knocked off cabinets because they're having babies. That is an outrage. And getting proper, I don't know, I think the figure is still low in local authorities having proper maternity rights for their elected representatives, obviously, you know, because they're not covered by statutory rights. That's a really important thing that, again, through the LGA, perhaps you can all encourage. I don't know what else. It's not an easy, there's not an easy, straightforward answer.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much, Margaret. That absolutely did make sense. And your point about, you know, effectively calling it out. I remember a colleague saying some time ago that just in a general point is what you permit, you promote. So I think that point about calling things out is really important. And another question I just wanted to ask both of you, if I can, and maybe start with Marianne on this one, is about networking and mentoring, and about actually how to carve out that time for networking, and any advice on how people can get mentoring, for example.
Thank you. Yes, there are several ways. I have the people I mentor, I make appointments. So we have a phone call once every 2 weeks with each. And I find that very effective. I keep careful notes, so make sure we're not running over anything. There's always a plan for what we're going to do next. And I think that's quite important, and some communication in between. So I think you do have to actually slot it in as a piece of work, you know, something that you're going to be doing, and make it clear. We have the Local Government Association provides a very, very good peer mentoring team for elected councillors from district level, borough level up, not parish, because that's through a different body. But the independent network provides support more widely for independent people who want to be independent. And then the parties also have systems as well. So I think it's quite a good scheme. You know, there is a lot available, and it is simply about asking, building a relationship with someone if you can, but it's also, you offer a lot. You know, every time I'm mentoring somebody, I'm learning a lot. I'm finding, you know, different things that are happening in different places, and quite often it's very useful to think through the whole process again, just in case you've missed something along the line and looking for a new perspective. So I actually find it enormously helpful and very useful, and strengthening your networks.
Thank you for that. And actually, before I come to you, Margaret, on that, I've noticed as well that we have got a number of questions. So I just want to ensure that I bring the questions in from our attendees today. So Carla Thomas has said that she's a disabled woman councillor and was actively discouraged from ever aiming to be a leader or cabinet member. And she was given punitive sanctions for mooting the idea, and was removed as chair of committee. And what would your advice be to challenge this behaviour?
God, that is shocking.
It's terrible.
Is she willing to tell us which council? That's calling it out. That's calling it out. That is shocking. It is absolutely shocking. You know, and hopefully, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. What was her name?
Carla Thomas.
Carla, you must have some friends who you can work with, whether they're on your council or whether they're on other councils. You've got to call that out. That is just an unacceptable way to behave. And you have to shame those people who put you in that position, and that you lost your job. Can I just say, so, I mean, I cannot think of another thing, but that has to be, I'm sure the LGA would provide support in that instance. There must be somebody you can talk to in the LGA who would put you together with other people who are probably also disabled women, counsellors, and you could talk to them. But you really must expose that. Can I just say something about networking as well? Because I think, and a little bit about also mentoring. I mean, obviously regular sessions are hugely important, but I always give my phone number to the women I'm mentoring, because something happens when you just want to pick up the phone and say, you know, what do I do about this? Or I'm in this situation, or this has happened to me. And I think it's important to have that direct access. You know, I may not be able to answer the phone when they ring, but I will always ring back. And on networking, what I find is women are much better at managing our time. And I always remember one of the networks, actually, it wasn't when I was in politics, it was when I was working in the private sector. And that was just as hostile to women pushing through the glass ceiling. And we met at 8 o'clock in the morning for breakfast, and that was an hour. So it was a very close, it was a time, you know, it was a time limited thing, but that hour once a month was completely and utterly and totally brilliant. And the relationships that I established through that network really stood me in good stead. I tackled the sexism and misogyny that I found in my place of work. So you can manage it by timing it. And in Parliament, you know, we just do, I make a real effort. Just, it's very simple things as well. Sort of, I mean, I always remember Justine Greening when she first was at the dispatch box in her first job as a minister in the Cameron government. And she managed all those questions and spoke without a note, which was brilliant. You know, that takes a lot of guts. So I just went up to her after and said, that was great. She's a Tory, I'm Labour, but she gave a great performance. And I think that camaraderie between women is very, very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm conscious of the time. We've got a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to just mention a number of other questions that we have and comments. So, you know, a core point that's coming through that is about your amazing speeches. So thank you very much. That's a core comment that's coming through the questions that we have. And Nicole has actually said, what advice can you give about mentoring others in terms of standing for election?
Let me start. For standing for election, you do want to get in touch with another support body. So, for example, the local government association is really good. Be a Councillor campaign, it's called, and in fact, it's hashtag Be a Councillor, so you can find it online. Secondly, the various groups like the Independent Network. You know, join one or one of the others, the Labour Party, or you can join those and they provide support. Certainly, I don't know so much about the others, but I do know about the Independent Network, and that does. Also, can I pick up so lots of support available, really keen to help you. Please get in touch. On the issue of calling out, I just want to, you have to be really political, I think, about this, in political with a small p, diplomatic, careful, because I have also seen cases where complaints are put forward and they are reacted to with counter complaints, which have been very unpleasant. So I think what's really important is to go carefully and to speak, you know, find your allies high up in the authority and go to them. So I do think it's right to call out. Particularly in meetings, if there's bad goings on in meetings, I always tell people to stand up and say, actually, I'm not happy with that. I don't think my electorate would be. You know, that sort of thing really needs doing, or every single time. But certainly calling out is absolutely right, but just do it really carefully and make sure you've got some support when you do it, because it can be quite a difficult experience. Just make sure you've got support on board first.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that during the course of those answers, I think that the question that Dipti asked has been answered as well in terms of becoming active locally. So I think on that note, in terms of Marianne, your point about thinking carefully about calling out, I think on that note, I think looking at the time, it's 10:40, that I think we need to just draw this session to a close. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. You've got your feedback you've had is about your amazing speeches, and they were absolutely amazing. I feel very, very privileged to have been able to introduce you and listen to you firsthand. So thank you very much.